It always starts with a story people want to believe, right? Picture this. Two beautiful misfits falling head over heels in love in a city that is trying to remember how to breathe after the hurricane choked it. Post-Katrina, New Orleans felt like a ghost version of itself, half drowned, half reborn. You could see cracked sidewalks holding memories that no one wanted to revisit. And right in the middle of all that ruin stood Zach Bowen and Addie Hall, clinging to each other like they were the last two people left in the world. And honestly, in a way, they kind of were. They stayed when everyone else evacuated, riding out the darkness in a French Quarter apartment with no power and no running water. Can you imagine cooking meals over a candle stove? They danced in the street with other stubborn survivors who refused to abandon their beloved city, living in the moment despite the chaos around them. People romanticized them. You know, the quirky bartender couple laughing through the apocalypse. Addie brewed coffee on a brick fire pit she built outside, and Zach strummed his guitar on the stoop, filling the air with music. They traded drinks in the Quarter like currency, and photographers couldn't resist capturing their vibe. Reporters came around, drawn to their story, and they became mascots of resilience without even asking for it. But here is the thing: anyone close to them knew there was something a bit unstable simmering beneath the surface. There was an erratic chemistry between them, two damaged souls blending trauma with passion like it was some kind of twisted romance. Zach carried the weight of Iraq in his spine, the haunting images, the things he did, and the way his mind refused to come home even after he stepped off that plane. Addie had her own storms to weather, childhood wounds that never healed, a deep-seated distrust, and a volatility that sometimes erupted into aggression. Together, they were brilliant 1 hour and explosive the next. They could be drunk in love one night, laughing and dancing, and then screaming at each other on the balcony the very next morning. It was a beautiful mess, full of highs and lows, and you couldn't help but feel for them, right? By 2006, Katrina had stopped flooding the streets, but it never stopped flooding their minds. The city rebuilt just enough for people to pretend things were normal, but the two of them didn't rebuild anything. They just moved from one apartment to another, thinking maybe the ghosts would stay behind if they changed address. They never did. The bills piled up. The drinking got heavier. The fights took on a rhythm, loud, frantic, repetitive. Friends would watch them switch from affection to fury in seconds, like someone flicked a hidden switch inside them neither of them understood. When they moved into the apartment on North Rampart Street, something shifted. Addie wanted space, independence, a fresh start. Zach wanted calm, escape, numbness. They weren't partners anymore, just two wounded people clawing for room to breathe. And the apartment became the battlefield where their mental states finally tore completely open. Addie told him she wanted him out. She was done. She was tired. She was choosing herself for once. She went to the landlord behind his back, tried to have the lease put solely in her name. When he found out, something cracked inside him, a fracture that had been building since Iraq, since Katrina, since the moment he realized he didn't recognize the man in his own skin anymore. One night in October, neighbors heard nothing. No fight, no shattering glass, no escalation, just a pocket of silence so deep it swallowed the whole building. Whatever happened between them wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was the quiet kind of break, the moment a brain stops differentiating between threat and enemy, between partner and demon. And after it was over, after Addie was gone, Zach didn't run. He didn't panic. He didn't turn himself in. He just kept living in that apartment as if he was suspended outside time. Days passed. Bar shifts blurred into each other. Bartenders saw him act strangely calm, like he'd finally found some twisted version of peace. He gave away his possessions. He apologized to people he hadn't wronged. He stopped pretending to hold himself together. And all the while, he lived in the apartment with the aftermath of what he'd done, walking through rooms like a man floating underwater, the pressure crushing him from all sides. He cooked meals next to memories he couldn't face. He slept beside ghosts he created, his mind frayed further, strands of sanity snapping one by one. Eventually, he couldn't carry the weight anymore. He walked barefoot along the French Quarter at night, drifting like a sleepwalker, then made his way to the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. He rode the elevator up to the very top, stepped out onto the rooftop, lit a cigarette like it was any ordinary end to any ordinary night, and left behind the one thing that finally told the truth. A note. Not a dramatic manifesto, not some grand explanation. Just a confession written in the voice of a man whose mind had been unraveling long before the final snap. Then he stepped off the roof. That fall. It marked the end of everything, but it left behind a storm of questions that just wouldn't quit. The police, following the note, found their way back to the apartment. What they discovered was chilling the tangible aftermath of a man who'd been unraveling long before Addie's tragic end. It wasn't the gore that haunted the detectives. It was the eerie silence that hung in the air, a haunting reminder that he'd been trapped in a nightmare version of normal life for days, maybe even weeks. His handwriting was shaky, fragmented, almost like a desperate attempt to document the pieces of his mind as they crumbled. You could see apologies scrawled next to accusations, military trauma tangled with domestic chaos, grief intertwined with blame. His thoughts were a chaotic whirlpool, lacking any real structure or clarity. There was no justification, just a raw, unfiltered monologue from someone whose sanity had been eroding layer by layer, long before the world even caught a glimpse of the cracks. Those who once romanticized Zach and Addie's love story, set against the chaotic backdrop of Katrina, suddenly had to confront a much darker truth. They weren't just symbols of resilience. They were two deeply wounded souls navigating a city bursting with unhealed scars. Their relationship, it was far from a fairy tale. Picture it more like a pressure cooker, sealed tight with PTSD, addiction, and instability, all simmering alongside the psychological aftershocks of a city still trying to find its footing after disaster. What really hits home isn't just the tragedy of murder or suicide, or even that apartment that became a mausoleum of a relationship unraveling at the seams. It's the gut-wrenching realization that sometimes two people don't tear each other apart out of hatred. Instead, they end up shattering each other because they're both already breaking inside. When broken people cling too tightly, love too fiercely, and fall too fast, it's like a dizzying free fall with no one there to catch them. It's a reminder that love can be both a lifeline and a noose, binding them together even as it pulls them apart, leaving behind a haunting echo of what once was.